November 24th, 1971, was a cold, unremarkable evening at Portland International Airport. People were tired, heading home for the holidays, and boarding Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, exactly like they had dozens of times before. Among them was a quiet man in his mid-40s. He wore a sharp black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple dark tie. At the counter, he paid cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle and gave an alias that would soon be known everywhere: Dan Cooper. Looking at this photograph of a typical 1970s cabin, you can see the relaxed environment. Passengers settled into these yellow seats, lit cigarettes, and read the evening paper as the plane climbed into the sky. No one gave the man in the dark suit a second thought. Once they reached cruising altitude, Cooper calmly signaled a flight attendant and handed her a folded piece of paper. She took it, slipped it into her pocket, and walked away. She assumed this quiet businessman was just slipping her his phone number. That assumption of safety, the idea that this was just another boring commuter flight, was the exact vulnerability Cooper relied on. He blended so perfectly into the background of standard aviation procedure that a lethal threat was already sitting comfortably in the back row. When the flight attendant passed his row again, Cooper leaned in. He looked directly at her and calmly suggested she look at that piece of paper immediately. She unfolded the note. The exact wording has been lost to time, but the message was explicitly clear. He had a bomb, and she needed to sit down beside him right away. She sat. To prove he wasn't bluffing, Cooper cracked open his dark briefcase just enough for her to look inside. She saw 8 red cylinders, coated in wire, hooked to a large battery. He closed the case and laid out his terms. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency and 4 parachutes delivered to the plane when it landed in Seattle. If there was any delay, he would detonate the explosive. Hijackings usually involve demands to fly to Cuba or political hostage exchanges. Asking for cash along with multiple parachutes introduced a completely foreign variable. The FBI suddenly had no playbook, because a mid-air skydiving escape from a commercial airliner was an entirely new threat. Looking at this image of Flight 305 isolated on the tarmac, you can see the tense situation waiting in Seattle. Air traffic control scrambled to clear the runway, keeping the plane circling for hours while authorities frantically gathered the money and the parachutes. The FBI ultimately decided they couldn't risk the passengers' lives, authorizing full compliance. Agents brought a heavy knapsack filled with 10,000 $20 bills and the 4 parachutes directly to the aircraft door. True to his word, Cooper allowed all 36 passengers, plus 2 flight attendants, to exit the plane safely. But he kept the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and 1 attendant on board as his insurance policy. By letting the civilians go, Cooper neutralized the FBI's ability to storm the aircraft. A SWAT raid was far too risky with the flight crew still held hostage, along with a live explosive. In a matter of minutes, Cooper isolated his targets and gained complete control over a massive commercial jetliner. With the plane refueled and the cabin empty, Cooper ordered the pilots back into the sky. He dictated highly specific flight parameters: head south toward Mexico, leave the landing gear down, and keep the airspeed remarkably slow. Outside the aircraft, conditions were brutal. It was pitch black, temperatures near freezing, and a severe Pacific Northwest storm violently rocked the jet. At approximately 8 p.m., the aircraft leveled out exactly at Cooper's requested altitude of 10,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, a warning light flashed, followed by a sharp, unmistakable drop in cabin pressure. This diagram shows exactly what was happening. The Boeing 727 was unique because it featured an aft air stair, a door situated right under the tail. Cooper unlocked and lowered the heavy stairs directly into the freezing slipstream. Wearing a dark suit, dress shoes, and a parachute, with $200,000 strapped to his body, Cooper walked down those vibrating metal stairs and stepped off into the raging storm. Law enforcement had prepared barricades, snipers, and tracking planes for a ground confrontation. By exiting mid-flight into the vast wilderness, Cooper rendered every single police tactic entirely useless. He executed an exit strategy that completely bypassed traditional capture. 2 hours later, Flight 305 touched down safely in Reno, Nevada, with its rear stairs scraping the tarmac. When armed agents finally stormed the cabin, all they found were empty seats. This police sketch of D.B. Cooper, a media misinterpretation of his alias that quickly stuck, was plastered across the country. The FBI swept dense forests, interviewed thousands of people, and investigated hundreds of suspects matching this description. They found absolutely nothing. The trail stayed cold for 9 years. Then, in 1980, an 8-year-old boy was digging a fire pit on the banks of the Columbia River, miles away from the suspected drop zone. He uncovered 3 bundles of severely decayed $20 bills. This image shows the actual recovered currency. The FBI cross-referenced the serial numbers on these decaying bills and confirmed a perfect match. This was exactly $5,800 of Cooper's ransom money. Finding the money should have narrowed the search, but it actually threw the entire investigation into disarray. The bills were found upstream from where the plane flew, and the rubber bands holding them together were still intact. Geologists and hydrologists couldn't agree on how the money arrived there naturally, leaving investigators with evidence that flatly contradicted their mathematical models. More than half a century has passed since that freezing November night. Aside from the cash, no trace of the parachute or the briefcase, the remaining money, or the man himself has ever been recovered. The evidence leaves us with a stark binary choice. Either the parachute failed and he plummeted to his death in the unforgiving Washington wilderness, or he somehow survived the impact, walked out of the woods, and quietly lived out the rest of his life under a new name. This building housed the world's premier investigative agency, and they pursued every single lead for 45 years. Finally, in 2016, the FBI officially closed the active investigation, acknowledging they had exhausted all credible avenues. Extorting $200,000 mid-flight was an audacious crime. Escaping without a trace elevated the act into modern mythology. By stepping out of an airplane and disappearing into the darkness, D.B. Cooper cemented himself as the ultimate American ghost story.